Who are these people who will be liable to deduct TDS? Because we remember, normally in ordinary course of business, we do a lot of transactions amongst each other, and a lot of time the values are greater than 2.5 lakh. But we never deduct each other's TDS. Why? Because we are not specified people notified by government who should be deducting TDS. So government has given a list of 4 people who are liable to deduct TDS, which means only if supplies are made to these 4 people, that to value greater than 2.5 lakh, then only these 4 people are going to deduct your TDS. First is central government, state government, department establishment. See, I made Modi ji here. Modi ji means government. Meloni. Hashtag Melody. So let's say Melanie made a supply of greater than 2.5 lakh taxable value. To whom, ma'am? To central government, state government, department establishment, government agencies, local authority, or some other people whom government may notify. As of now, government has already notified 4 people here in this notified category. One, authority, board, or any body set up under the Act of Parliament. Can you all give me an example of a body which is set up under the Act of Parliament? You know it. Trust me, you know it. Then we say any government registered society, any public sector undertaking, or establishment where the control is at least 51% or greater with government only. So basically, these are all government bodies. Or any authority body which is set up by the Act of Parliament. Very good, ma'am. ICAI. You see any ICAI module or whatever material you have where ICAI is written, in a small bracket below it, they would have written set up under the Act of a Parliament. So all these bodies which are basically government establishments, government departments, agencies, local authorities, public sector undertaking, government registered societies, or any body which is set up by the Act of Parliament, all these people, when receiving taxable value of supply greater than 2.5 lakh, they are liable to deduct 2% TDS. So what they will do, let's say I am required to pay 5 lakh rupees for taxable value to my supplier, I will only pay 5 lakh into 98 percentage. 2 percentage I will deduct TDS and give it to government. Then my supplier will claim this TDS from the government later on. Just the normal regular mechanism of how TDS works. Whenever you make payment to your supplier, you deduct some amount, you pay it to government, and then that person can claim it back from the government. Ma'am, Ministry of Defense is also a government department, but still, Ministry of Defense is not liable to deduct anyone's TDS. So let's say I supply some arms, ammunitions, or something like that to Ministry of Defense. They will not be deducting my TDS even if value of supply is greater than 2.5 lakh, because we don't want to shout, inform, and tell everyone that CCC Ministry of Defense has done something. So Ministry of Defense will not be liable to deduct anyone's TDS irrespective of the value of supply. Then we say that if these people do any transactions amongst themselves only. So let's say a government establishment made a supply to a local authority. One PSU made a supply to ICAI. Then let's say one government registered society made a supply to another government registered society. So basically these people who are already specified as TDS deductors, if they do supply amongst themselves only, then also TDS will not come. So two situations. One, when supply is made to Ministry of Defense, and second, if these notified people undertake transactions amongst themselves only, then in those situations, liability to deduct TDS is not going to arise. Except there is this amendment, this new point being added. Earlier, there were only 3 people separately notified who were required to deduct TDS. Now, one more is added, which is a registered person receiving metal scrap from other registered person. See, metal scrap from URP to RP was falling under reverse charge mechanism, right? Do you remember this? We had studied a list of 1, 2, 3, 4 items which were taxable under reverse charge mechanism. There are certain goods which are taxable under reverse charge mechanism, of which one is metal scrap. So if an unregistered person is supplying some metal scrap to registered person, then the registered person was required to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism. Here we are talking about if a registered person is supplying metal scrap to another registered person, then this registered person will be required to deduct TDS at the time of making the payment to the supplier. Now, of course, we understand that these people will be doing transactions amongst themselves only. A metal scrap person will be dealing with another metal scrap person, which is very normal. They will be deducting each other's TDS. This is an exception. Otherwise, than that, if any of these people are doing transactions amongst themselves, involved amongst themselves, then these people will not be liable to deduct anyone's TDS. So here we are saying no TDS. No TDS if supplies made between above persons only. So if these people do transactions amongst themselves only, then no TDS is going to arise. Except but only this people, because they will to normally be dealing with each other only. No, a registered person supplying metal scrap to another registered person, TDS is applicable. So if these people are dealing amongst themselves, metal scrap people, then in that case TDS is going to apply. Otherwise, for all other people being notified doing transactions amongst themselves, TDS is not going to apply. Are you understanding? Say yes, ma'am. सेक्शन 52 मैम 51 में 2, 52 में आधा, 51 में 2, 52 में half. So the rate of TTS under section 51 was 2%, but the rate of TCS under section 52 is 0.5% combined, which means 0.25% CGST and 0.25% SGST. This is amended recently. Earlier it was 1%. Earlier it was 0.5 plus 0.5 aggregating to 1, but now it is 0.25 plus 0.25 aggregating to 0.5%. Now, ma'am, if I have made short payments or delayed payments in case of normal amounts payable, then what to do? Then also interest will be applicable at 18%. So, if supplies made during a tax period are declared in the return after due date, if you are declaring supplies in the return under section 39, interest at the rate of 18% per annum shall be calculated on tax paid by debiting the e-cash ledger. In all other cases, interest shall be calculated on the gross amount unpaid from due date till the date of payment. Okay, listen. Let us say what they are trying to explain here is, let's say, ma'am, May month return. When I should ideally file? 20 June. But I filed my May month return. Let us say on 27 June. The outward payable here was 100. I had 70 ITC with me and 30 was payable in cash. Can you tell me the interest here? Ma'am, I did late payment. For the month of May. The late payment here, whatever will be interest at the rate of 18% for 7 days, ma'am, because I am late by 7 days. I should have ideally filed on 20 June and pay the taxes, but I did not pay here. I filed the return on 27 June and paid the taxes on 27 June, which means now interest at the rate of 18% per annum for 7 days. The question here is, should I apply interest on 100 or should I apply interest on 30 is the question. Should I apply interest on 100 or should I apply interest on 30? 100 is my total outward payable on sales. 70 credit I have. 30 I paid using my cash ledger. So on the gross amount of 100 should I apply interest or on the net amount of 30 should I apply interest? The answer here is whatever you are paying using your cash ledger, 30 the net amount on that interest is going to be applicable. So whenever you are late in filing your return, you are filing your returns after the due date. Under section 39, interest will be applicable only on the amount which you are debiting from your e-cash ledger. On any other amount, let us say there is some demand arising on you or some other amounts which are payable by you, then the full gross amount, whether you pay it using cash or you pay it using credit, whatever is the full gross amount from due date till date of payment, you have to pay the interest. Say yes, ma'am, understood. This thing only is written here. Let's say output liability 100, ITC I have 30 and cash I paid 70. Then interest is to be levied on this 70 from the date following the due date till the date of actual date of payment. So if I'm late by 7 days, your interest will be applicable for 7 days. We'll also solve questions for the same. Now what is this small amendment saying here? If amount credited to e-cash ledger on or before due date of return but debited for payment while filing return after due date, no interest on such amount if it is lying in e-cash ledger from due date till the date of payment. So what here they are saying is, let us say I should have filed my May month return on 20 June. Ideally, 170 credit I was having, 30 I was required to pay using cash. I did not file on 20 June. I filed this on 27 June. But this 30, I did not pay using challan on 27 June. Already on the due date of filing return. Already on the due date of filing return, this 30 was present in my e-cash ledger. This 30 was already on or before the due date of return. 30 was already there. Last month only, let's say I had paid excess cash or I just paid the challan. I did not file the return. I just paid the challan. Amount is there in my cash ledger, but I am just filing the return late and paying later to government. Still, they are saying interest will not be applicable. Earlier, what they used to do is whatever you are paying from cash ledger, on that full amount, interest used to apply. But now government is saying that whatever you are new paying using challan, so this amount is not even lying in my cash ledger. I paid a fresh challan only, paid amount in my cash ledger and then filed return on 27 June. Then interest on this figure will be applicable. But if this 30 rupees is already there on the due date, if this 30 is already there on or before the due date, it's just that I am debiting it later on some late date when I am filing my return, then in that situation, interest is not going to apply on the amount that is already lying in my e-cash ledger from the due date till the date of payment. This amount should be present at all the times in your cash ledger from due date till the date of payment, then no need to pay interest on the same. Even if you are filing your return late, that works because amount you have as such deposited already. No, you have paid challan. Amount is there in your e-cash ledger, which means it has reached to government. It's just that you are not utilizing it. Therefore, no interest will be applicable here also. If you are paying a new, fresh challan, again, then in that case, when you are filing your return late and you are filing a fresh challan and now paying the amount in your cash ledger, then only interest is going to be applicable, that too on this net amount. So let us say out of 70 also, 30 was, 40 was so already, 30 or 40 was already lying in my cash ledger. Earlier I had paid extra for any reason. Then I will say that interest will only apply for 7 days on the new amount after due date that I deposited using my challan. Clear to everyone? Say yes, ma'am. Discussing more about GSTR 1, and there's also a new form being added which is GSTR 1A, which we will also discuss. First, let's understand what is this return all about. Am I required to make any payment in GSTR 1 or 1A? The answer is no. It is simply a form to submit the details of your outward supply. So if I have done a B2B supply or a UIN holder supply, I will simply provide invoice wise details. I will simply provide invoice wise details that to this person, this GST number, this date, I have made this supply, taxable value, tax amount, everything. So all the B2B supplies, including UIN holder supplies that you make, because the opposite person would be wanting to claim ITC, you will have to provide invoice wise details. Then this is amended now. This is 1 lakh. Please make correction. I amended in the chart. I forgot in this table to amend. This is 1 lakh, not 2.5 lakh. Okay. So here we are saying that if I am making any B2B supplies, whether it is intra or it is inter, I will have to upload always the invoice wise details of all supplies only. But if I am making B2C supplies and they are intra-state B2C supplies, then though I can provide consolidated details. Consolidated as in I don't have to provide invoice wise detail for the total month, total supply made to B2C people intra-state, I can give the total figure. However, interstate if I am doing, then state wise I have to show the consolidation. if the invoice are up to 1 lakh rupees. Earlier it was 2.5 lakh. Do you remember the same limits were there in revised tax invoices also, that if the invoice is up to 2.5 lakh you can issue consolidated revised tax invoice, but if it is more than 2.5 lakh you cannot consolidate interstate supplies. That same provision was here. Now they have amended the limit here. For declaring in GSTR 1 or 1A, they have made the limit 1 lakh rupees, but there is no corresponding amendment in the revised tax invoices chapter. So make sure you remember this point, that revised tax invoices, still the limit is 2.5 lakh only for consolidation. But when I am showing these invoices in my GSTR 1, if the invoice is greater than 1 lakh, I will have to give invoice wise detail for B2C supply also. And if the invoice value is up to 1 lakh rupees, then state wise I can make consolidation. So basically, let's say I make supplies to Rajasthan, Gujarat, Maharashtra. I am from Uttar Pradesh. Now in this situation, what total supplies I have made in Gujarat up to 1 lakh, all those I can consolidate and show. What total supplies I have made to Rajasthan, what total supplies I have made to Maharashtra. So consolidation doesn't mean a total of all B2C supplies. You have to make a state-wise total. Intra, forget the invoice value. Whatever intra-state B2C supply you have made, you can consolidate everything. Interstate B2 supply, state-wise you can consolidate, but the condition is invoice value should be up to 1 lakh. If any single invoice is more than 1 lakh rupees, I will have to give the invoice-wise detail just like I give for my B2B supplies. Not just invoices, you also have to show zero-rated supplies, exports, debit note, credit note. If there's any amendment to any invoice or credit note, debit note that you've already furnished in some prior period, you have received some advances, or earlier you had received advances, now you are adjusting those advances. All these details you are going to furnish in your GSTR 1. And some basic details like who is filing the GSTR 1, so your GST number, your legal name, your trade name, the HSN summary, for which period you are filing your GSTR 1. You also have to give document summary. What is document summary, ma'am? Let us say I issued 100 invoices this month. So I'll simply write the number of documents that I've issued 100 and what series is going on. Let's say 10179 is my bill number. 210279 is the total bill number that I issued. So you have to give this HSN summary also and document summary also for the particular period for which you are filing your GSTR 1. Tell me, if my sale in entire month is 0, I did not make any sales in the entire month, still will I be required to file GSTR 1? Say yes or no. If I have not made any sale in my particular period, do I still need to file my GSTR 1? The answer is yes, because only then government will get to know that I have not made any sales. If I don't file my return only, government will think that okay, I am going to now declare, I am going to now declare, I am going to now declare. So government will simply wait. No, let's say someone proposed Rabia today. Someone proposed Rabia today. Hey Rabia, I just like you so much. Will you be my girlfriend? Now Rabia has not given him any answer. This will keep the opposite person in anticipation that she might say yes, she might say no, she might be thinking about me. I don't know what she's thinking about me. But if Rabia says no, I am already taken, or let's say no, I don't like you, no, I don't see a future with you, the matter gets over there and then only. So we don't keep government in anticipation thinking that we will file return, then we will declare in some of our sales. No, we will file a nil return, inform government that we have not made any sales, and this is the only return. So even if you are not doing any business, still filing of GSTR 1 is absolutely mandatory. You have to file a nil return, and this nil return, no need to go to log into portal and then file. You can simply, using an SMS facility also with an OTP on your registered mobile number, you can file nil return without any problem. Right, ma'am. You have to also disclose the HSN codes. Yes, these are the same limits that you saw in the tax invoice chapter. If you are proceeding, your turnover is up to 5 CR, B2B 4, B2C optional 4. If your turnover is more than 5 CR, then 6-digit HSN code you have to declare. Invoice related details can be uploaded any time during the tax period, not just at the time of filing GSTR 1. Say, you cannot file your GSTR 1 prior to end of your particular month. So let's say I'm filing GSTR1 for May month. I cannot file my GSTR1 in the May. May has to end, only after that I can file my GSTR1. However, I can anytime start putting details in GSTR1. So as and when I'm making sales, let's say I want to simultaneously only put the details of all the sales in my GSTR1, I can do so. So furnishing detail, adding detail in the return you can do anytime. But furnishing, filing of return, you can only do after the period. So we are saying that you can also, during anytime during the tax period, you can upload the details of your invoices. However, filing only you have to do when you are actually filing. What is IFF, ma'am, and what is GSTR 1A? We are understanding what is GSTR 1. There are two other terms also being used. One is GSTR 1A and another is IFF. Just give me 15-20 minutes time. Everything will come and you will understand. As of now, just listen to what I am saying. Details related to invoice can be modified or deleted any number of times till the submission. See, once you submit, the information is gone with the government. I have not furnished my GSTR1. I have just entered the details of my invoice online on GSTR1. I am yet to submit GSTR1. I can make any change. See, understand. Now, though, you can even after sending a message make a change. But earlier in WhatsApp, what used to happen? I typed a message, I sent a message. Okay. I cannot edit it now. Till I am typing and I have not pressed the sent button, can I make changes any number of times? Oh ma'am, this is the hobby. We so many times write such huge paragraphs complaining about what's going on, and then ultimately we feel leave it, we delete everything and we close the app. Ma'am, this too we do very regularly. Yes. So this is the same situation here. Till the time you submit your return, you can delete, modify, do whatever you want to do with the details in GSTR1. Once you submit, then it is gone with the government. Then for amendment, there are separate provisions. Okay. No need to upload the scanned copies of invoices. You don't have to submit the invoices to government. You just have to give details of the invoices, that this was the GST number, this is the date, invoice number, taxable value, tax amount, total amount, that's all. So all these information you have to provide. You don't have to provide the entire scanned copy of your invoice. Say yes, ma'am, understood everything. Now we'll discuss what if. What if I want to make some amendments in the details that I've already furnished in my GSTR1. But before that, everything clear till here? Yes, ma'am. If I am a monthly return filer, I will be filing my GSTR1 till 11th of the next month. If I am a quarterly return filer, I will be filing my GSTR1 till 13th of the quarter, 13th after the end of the quarter. I have to furnish all the invoice-wise details for B2B supply, because the opposite person would be wanting to claim ITC. For all the B2C supplies, intrastate, I can consolidate everything. Interstate, I can only consolidate the invoice with value up to 1 lakh. If the value is greater than 1 lakh, I have to show the invoice-wise specific detail. If I have not done any business for the entire period, still I will be required to file a nil GSTR1. HSN code same to same as tax invoice chapter. Quickly tell me, yes ma'am, we are with you. Chalo. Ma'am, gotcha. Gotcha. Perfect. Now this new form is inserted by government, GSTR 1A. It's completely optional form. Like GSTR 1 filing is mandatory. GSTR 1A filing only if you require, then you do, otherwise it's optional. So optional form GSTR 1A provided to add or amend particulars missed or declared in GSTR 1 of current tax period, including IFF for first and second month of the quarter. This IFF point as of now you can ignore, because I have not explained you what is IFF. Once I explain, I'll take you back here again. As of now, what we are saying, let's say I have filed my GSTR 1 already, but I missed on some 4-5 invoices to declare in GSTR 1. Once a return filed cannot be rectified. Like in income tax, you can rectify your income tax return, is not the case in GST. Return filed is filed, you cannot rectify, you can make amendments later via these separate mechanisms. Okay, so I have already filed a GSTR1. Before filing, so I can do anything that I want to do. After filing, so it is gone. Now let's assume I missed on some invoices, or the invoices I furnished, there is some change that I need to do. So I want to either amend a particular detail that I have already furnished, or I want to add new detail that I have missed on to furnish. You can do so using the form GSTR1A for that period. Now GSTR1A is completely optional, of course, can be filed only once for a return period. So once I file GSTR1, I missed on some invoices, I can file GSTR1A, declare all those, make changes. After filing 1A also, if I feel like, oh shit, I missed on one other invoice also, now no GSTR1A available with you. Now you wait for next month GSTR1 where you can show all these details. Okay. Corresponding effect of changes made through GSTR 1A shall be reflected in GSTR 3B for the same tax period, but to be at recipient's end for the next tax period. What they are saying here, see, listen. Let's say I filed my GSTR 1. I filed my GSTR 1 for April month on 12th, on let's say 11 May. This was the due date and I filed on 11 May. Immediately after filing, I realized, shit, I missed on 2 invoices to declare. So on 12th or let's say on 13th May, I filed my GSTR 1A and I declared those 2 missing invoices in GSTR 1A. Here we are saying that when I will be now filing my April month GSTR 3B, these 2 missed invoices will be considered here when I file my 3B. So in the auto-populated figures that come in GSTR 3B, all the details that I furnish in GSTR 1A, any additional thing added or any amendment being made will be considered and accordingly effect will be given in GSTR 3B of the same month. However, all the invoices that you declare in your GSTR 1 up to the due date gets reflected in GSTR 2B of your recipient. Only the ITC that is reflected in GSTR 2B of my recipient will be eligible for my recipient to claim, right? So let's say I purchased something from a supplier. If that supplier is not filing GSTR 1 within the due date, the credit will not reflect in my 2B. If the credit is not reflecting in my 2B, I am not eligible to avail that credit. So what they are saying here is, whatever I declare in GSTR 1 up to due date will of course come in GSTR 2B. But whatever I declare in GSTR 1A, it will not now show in April month 2B to my recipient. It will now show in May month 2B to my recipient. So if I have missed on any invoice or there is any amendment that I am doing after the due date of GSTR 1 in GSTR 1A, in that situation 3B to same month effect will be taken, but it will reflect in my recipient's 2B in the next month. Say yes, ma'am. So simply corresponding effect of whatever changes I make through GSTR 1A shall be reflected in 3B in the same tax period, but to be at the recipient's end for the next tax period. So if I miss something, yes Lakshmi, yes. You can provide additional, you can add the invoices that you have missed on. You can also amend the invoices that you have already declared. Both things you can do using GSTR 1A. Only one change you cannot do. That is, if the GST number I have to change. So let us say I made a sales to Lakshmi. But while filing GSTR 1, I mistakenly entered the GST number of Ayushi and filed my GSTR 1. Now you cannot amend GST number of your recipient simply by furnishing GSTR 1A. Now you will have to wait for next month GSTR 1 where you have particular amendment tables in which you can make all of these amendments. Listen to me once again. If the due date to file GSTR 1A is gone, which I am going to teach you now, or let us say there is a change in the GST number of recipient, then you will have to wait for next month GSTR1 to open. In the next month GSTR1, you have particular amendment table where you can give a reference that in this period, this was the invoice number in which I want to change this figure, or I want to change the GST number, or whatever change you want to do. So amendment for any prior period. See, GSTR 1A is for the current period only, no. So for April month, in after filing April GSTR 1, same month only I can file GSTR 1A. If one period is gone, then though I cannot use GSTR 1A. Then for any prior period amendment or a simple amendment of GST number of recipient, what I will do is, in any subsequent period, anytime till 30 November following the end of financial year or actual date of filing annual return, whichever is earlier, I can make amendments, I can make rectifications using the amendment table of GSTR 1 for subsequent periods. So let us say June 2025, I furnished some incorrect detail or I missed on some invoices. Now after June, I filed GSTR 1, everything was over. I forgot to show this in GSTR 1A also. So if this is June 25, which means FY 25-26. So till 30 November 2026 or actual date of filing annual return, whichever is earlier, till this period in any GSTR 1 using the amendment tables, I can make these changes. Okay, ma'am, understood. Then we are saying there is no particular due date for filing GSTR 1A. 1A will be available on portal every month, and for QRMP people every quarter from due date or actual date of filing GSTR 1, whichever is later, till actual filing of GSTR 3B for the same tax period. So as soon as I file my GSTR 1, if I file before due date, it will start before. If I start on due date, then after due date, then. So we are simply saying whichever is later. So let us say April month GSTR 1. Ideally, I should file by 11 May. I filed it on 9th May only. Still my GSTR 1A will open after 11 May only. So whichever is later, you always have to take. If you file return earlier, you wait till due date. If you are filing after due date, then whenever you are actually filing GSTR 1, from there your GSTR 1A will open. So we are simply saying the date of actual filing of GSTR 1 or the due date to file GSTR 1, whichever is later. From there, my GSTR 1A will open, and the day on which I file my GSTR 3B, my GSTR 1A will close. So there is no specific due date as such. It depends on when you are filing GSTR 1 and 3B. So after filing of 1 and before filing of 3B, this period is open for me to declare any missing invoice or to make any amendment in GSTR 1. By filing GSTR 1A, corresponding effect will immediately show in the 3B that I will file. But in the recipient's 2B, it will reflect in the next month now, because the due date to file GSTR 1 is gone, and whatever you declare till due date only gets reflected in my recipient's GSTR 2B. Say yes, ma'am. Say yes, ma'am. Understood clearly. This last point is with respect to IFF facility that I will revisit once I complete IFF. Other than this paragraph, tell me, is the entire page clear to you? Because this is amendment, it automatically becomes important for all of us. So ma'am, GSTR 1 is simply a return to furnish the details of my outward supplies. For quarterly people, 13. For monthly people, 11. Okay. I cannot file it during the tax period. Only CTP or cancellation of registration people can file during the period. Otherwise, I have to wait after the period only. I don't have to actually scan and upload my invoice. I just have to give the details of the invoices. B2B, invoice wise detail. B2C, I can do consolidation, intrastate, everything. Interstate, only till 1 lakh rupee invoices consolidation can be done. If I miss anything or I misreport anything in GSTR 1, I have one more option open with me, GSTR 1A, which I can file till I file the 3B for this period. Once I file 3B, GSTR 1A for this period will be closed. Now only option left with me is in next GSTR GSTR 1. I can use amendment tables and make these amendments. Till when, ma'am? Till 30 November or actual date of filing annual return for this particular financial year, whichever is earlier, I can do amendment in any of the subsequent GSTR 1 using the amendment tables. Even if there is no business, still I will be required to compulsorily file a nil GSTR 1. Say yes, ma'am, understood. So here they are simply saying that for the first and second month of the quarter in QRMP scheme, when I'm filing the IFF, I don't have GSTR 1A option. Whatever I filed in IFF is gone. Now, after the end of quarter only, my 1 and 1A will open where I can make changes. So, separate amendment facility for IFF is not available. For first and second month of the quarter, you simply file IFF. If there is any mistake, anything is missed out, you wait for the quarter to get over. Only after that, your 1 and 1A will open where you can make the changes. Say yes, ma'am, understood. If the goods are imported by a special economic zone unit or a developer for the authorized operations authorized by government, GST is exempt, and now we are saying that GST compensation cess is also exempt. Initially in the BEREC, they had given exemption only for IGST portion, not for GST compensation cess, but now they have said that IGST as well as GST compensation cess, both of the things will be exempt only if the goods are imported by SEZ unit or developer. See the difference. If the goods are imported by 100% EOU, IGST, GST compensation cess as well as custom duty, all three are exempt. But in case of SEZ unit, custom duty is levied. Only GST and GST compensation cess is exempt. Are you understanding the difference? Yes, ma'am. Now moving on to Rule 96, simply refund of tax paid on goods exported. So simply whenever I am making export of goods with payment of IGST, whenever I am making export of goods with payment of IGST, what is the procedure being followed? Let's understand. Very simple. I don't have to make a refund application separately. When I export my goods, I file a shipping bill. When I export my goods, I file a shipping bill with the customs department, and this shipping bill only becomes my deemed refund application. It's very simple. Of course, if a person is exporting with payment of GST, he will be asking for of the refund for the same, obviously. So no need to make a separate application again. Your shipping bill filed at the time of export only becomes your deemed refund application. Okay. Application deemed to have been filed when the person in charge of conveyance duly files a departure manifest, export report covering number and date of shipping bills or bill of export. So what happens is, whenever you are exporting some goods, the conveyance in which your goods are leaving, the person in charge of that conveyance has to file a report with the government, with the customs department. It's known as departure manifest or export manifest. You'll understand this in more details in the customs portion. So very simple. The person in charge will be filing a full report with the person in charge of the conveyance. Basically, let's say your goods are going in a ship, so the master of the ship, or your goods are going in an aircraft, then the pilot or whoever is the person in charge of the aircraft will be furnishing a report to the customs department stating what people are going in this ship or aircraft and what goods are going in this ship or aircraft. So simply this kind of departure manifest or export manifest covering all the number and date of shipping bills, etc., is filed by the person in charge to the customs department. Also, the applicant has furnished a valid return under GSTR 3B. See, very simple. If I am exporting something, it is also my sales only. If I am exporting something, it is also my sales only. So when I am filing shipping bills for export, I will also be filing GSTR 1 under GST. All the outward supplies are furnished compulsorily in GSTR 1A. So simple, the details that I am giving in my shipping bill to customs department has to match with the details that I am submitting in GSTR 1 at the GST portal. The answer is yes, ma'am. So simply we are saying that applicant also has to furnish a valid return. Now return includes GSTR 1 also and GSTR 3B also, because this is with payment of taxes. Right, ma'am. So the applicant has furnished a valid return which is GSTR 3B, because ultimately whatever payments etc. I make is in GSTR 3B only. Proviso says that whenever there is a mismatch between shipping bill and GSTR 1 or 1A, the application deemed to have been filed when the mismatch is rectified by the exporter. See, normally if everything is matching, my filing of shipping bill is only considered as my deemed filing of refund application. But when the particulars in my GSTR 1 and the particulars in my shipping bill are not matching, of course GST portal and customs portal are going to match the details. If it is not matching, they'll intimate me for a rectification, and the day on which I rectify and make my shipping bill and the details in GSTR 1 same, that will now be a date. That will now be a date when my refund application will be deemed considered as filed. PIC is person in charge. Whoever is the person in charge of the conveyance normally files all these reports, right? Yes. Also, your Aadhaar authentication has to be done. In Rule 10B, we've already studied that for Aadhaar authentication is mandatory. What was for which Aadhaar authentication was mandatory, ma'am? Is simply refund application and revocation cancellation. So, simply says that refund and revocation cancellation Aadhaar authentication is mandatory. Right, ma'am. Provided that exporter of goods may file RFD01 electronically for refund of additional IGST paid on account of upward revision in price of goods subsequent to export and on which IGST paid has already been refunded. See, what this amendment is saying here. Normally, whenever I make exports, I will be filing my shipping bill, furnishing the details in GSTR 1, everything is okay. What happens is the details of export invoices that I furnish in GSTR 1 or 1A are transmitted electronically by GST common portal to the IceGate portal, because shipping bill you file on IceGate portal, GSTR 1 you file on GST portal. The GST portal will transmit the detail to IceGate portal. Let's see, this is what the person has filed in GSTR 1. You please match. Is it same like shipping bill? Yes or no? If there's discrepancy, in that situation, of course, you'll have to first rectify it and then your application will be considered as filed. Also, you actually have to pay the taxes. No, because what we are studying as of now is refund of tax on GST paid. I'm talking about export with payment of GST, right? So, where the payment I'll be doing whenever I file my GSTR 3B. So, as soon as I file my GSTR 3B and make the payment, simply the portal, the IceGate portal or the proper officer of customs will be informed about the same, and then they will process my refund. Right, ma'am? So, here we are saying that let us say I made an export, the invoice, the shipping bill, everything is perfect. I got the refund, export is done. Subsequently, there can be, of course, upward revision in prices. Let us say originally I exported something for $100, right? If at all there is a downward revision in prices, let's say after export, there's some negotiation, something happens and my recipient ultimately agrees that no, we will be paying $90 only. And if there is non-realization of $10, government is anyways going to take the refund back from me. If there is non-realization, if at all there is non-realization of proceeds after export, we've already understood that in case of non-realization, whatever amount is not realized, proportionate refund will also not be given to me. So, downward revision thing was already sorted only. Now people, there was no provision for upward revision. Let us say I sent the goods for $100 export. The customer was so impressed with the quality, and there was a clause also in the contract that let's say if after delivery there's a satisfactory quality, etc., the prices will be, let's say, upward revised to $120. I actually realized $120, but refund is already processed for $100 because this is what was in the shipping bill. Now, I am not shipping anything extra for $20. Whatever is shipped is already shipped only. That product's price is not now 100, it is 120. In GST, I can issue a debit note, of course, right? Whenever we want to increase the sale price, I can issue a debit note. But refund is already given to me. And no extra shipping bill file, no extra export again is done for this 20. Export is already done. The price of the same is not 100 now but 120. Now what to do? Because there was no provision of upward revision. Government now says that no problem. For this upward revised portion of $20, what you can do is file a refund application separately. Normally, shipping bill is only my deemed refund application. But when the prices are increased after exports, you can electronically separately file a refund application RFD01, because you can now explain it to government that on this $20, I have raised an additional debit note. I have also paid additional GST. My earlier refund is already done, sanctioned, processed. Only for this additional portion, now I want a refund. You can provide them with the evidences, and you can also claim refund on this increased amount later on if your prices are getting revised upwards. Tell me, are you understanding this? What I am saying is, see, just now we studied that whenever you export goods and the FEMA time limit is over, you have to give the refund back to government if you are not realizing the sales proceeds. So after export, let us say there is a downward revision in the prices, my recipient will not be giving me that forex, and ultimately I will not get refund of the same also. This provision already existed. Government had made themselves safe that if the person is not receiving forex, we will give less refund only. But what about at the time of export, the price was $100, but now let's say internationally prices increased, or because of some negotiation or any reason, we have upward revised the price to $120. For $20, of course, in GST, I can issue a debit note and make with payment of taxes on the portal. But of course, I will not export anything again. The goods are already gone, exported, shipping bill filed, everything is over. So for this additional $20, now what you can do is file a separate refund application electronically in RFD01. Inform to government that, see, I have issued a debit note, I have also paid GST on this $20 again separately. So whatever GST now I have paid later on, you please give refund of the same to me again. This is how upward revision in prices you can claim a refund of the same. Earlier there was no provision for the same, but now via an amendment, government has inserted a provision for the same also, which means it's a welcoming amendment for us, a beneficial amendment for us. Say yes, everyone. So what happens basically is you file a shipping bill with the customs department. You file all the documents required as a person in charge at the customs department. You will file GSTR 1, 1A or 3B, 1 or 1A, 3B at the GST portal. GST portal will transmit the information to IceGate portal, everything will be matched and your refund will be processed. In case something is not matching, first you have to match both, rectify, and then your refund is going to be processed. So I don't have to make a separate refund application as such. Both the portals will automatically do everything and I will get my refund. But if, let us say, plus my Aadhaar has to be authenticated because of Rule 10B. But let us say I am not paying taxes, I am not filing 3B, not filing 1 properly, of course they will not give me refund. Or if export is already done and there's a upward revision in price, because I will not export something again, export is already over, I will simply issue a debit note under GST, pay additional taxes and then file my refund application separately electronically in RFD01. Now shipping bill cannot be my deemed application. Any problem till here, anyone? No, ma'am. Now we are saying that, let us say everything is okay only. I filed my shipping bill, I filed my GSTR 13B, but still can my refund be withheld? Yes. If the CGST, SGST, UTGST commissioner, or let us say proper officer of customs or CBIC, any officer of board is CBIC, right ma'am. If anyone, either GST department or customs department or Central Board of Indirect Taxes and Customs CBIC, if any officer from any area feels that there is some extra verification required to be done because of risk parameter, etc., in the interest of revenue of government, they can withhold your refund. What we are saying is, when the, let's say, either jurisdictional commissioner requests because he thinks there is some violation of GST, or proper officer of custom request because he thinks there is some violation of Customs Act, or let us say the commissioner in board is CBIC or any authorized officer based on data analysis or risk parameter is of the opinion that extra verification is required before giving refund to this person. In that situation, they can also withhold your refund. Now what happens is the entire claim is now transmitted to GST proper officer in a system generated RFD01. Intimation will be sent to the exporter also, intimation goes to the GST portal also, and now after all the verification later on, the refund will be processed and given to you. So normally the customs department only processes my refund, but here in this situation, if either GST or customs or the board officer thinks that there should be some extra verification before giving refund to me, they will simply make a application to withhold your refund, and now ultimately your claim will be transmitted to GST proper officer only. Normally you don't have to file any refund application. Your shipping bill is only deemed application. But now here in this situation, an application separately will be filed in RFD01. It will be system generated only. The intimation that the case is now transmitted to GST officer will be given to exporter also, and the said system generated form shall be deemed refund application and deemed to be filed on the date of transmission only. So the day on which this entire claim is transferred to the proper officer of GST department, now that day will be considered as your date of filing refund application and not your shipping bill now. Okay, however, later on whenever they are satisfied everything is okay, they can also give the refund back to you. For some notified class of goods, the refund, we have treaties with government of Bhutan. So in some cases, the refunds are given to government of Bhutan and not to the exporter. Not relevant for exam as such, very particular case. And for refund of IGST paid on services, you have to separately file RFD01 that we will study later on. This entire procedure that we studied with payment of GST is only for goods, because in goods only customs has a role to play. In goods only shipping bill etc. comes into picture. Whenever you export services, customs has no role to play. You always deal with the GST department only. So services is a separate case. You will have to separately file RFD01, do all the procedures, but only for goods whatever we studied here remains relevant. Again repeating, not that important for examination. Say yes, ma'am. Everyone quickly tell me. Everything clear till here? It is a simple mechanism. When I'm exporting goods with payment of taxes, I don't have to make a separate application. There's no formula etc. required. Simply whatever total I have paid, that total I should get as refund. If I'm not realizing sale proceeds, I will have to give the refund back to government. Or let us say, if my GSTR 1 or 3B or shipping bill etc. is mismatching, then there can be some possibility of some issues with the refund. Otherwise, normally in a very smooth manner, refund is processed. Perfect, ma'am. Now understanding, when I am exporting goods or services under bond or LUT, which means when without payment of taxes I am exporting. So the exporter has to execute a bond or LUT prior to export. Ma'am, what is LUT? LUT is letter of undertaking. LUT is, yes Ashish, of course, letter of undertaking. So simply we are saying that exporter has to execute bond or LUT prior to export, binding himself to pay tax. We are simply undertaking this. Letter of undertaking is kind of a promise that I am making to the department. So simply before export, I will furnish a bond or a letter promising to department that today I am not paying any GST. Today I am not paying any taxes, but I am promising this to government that for goods within 3 months, whatever time they allow. So I am simply saying that 15 days after expiry of 3 months plus further period allowed from the date of issue of invoice if the goods are not exported. See, today the day on which I am generating the invoice of export of goods, I will simply make an application to government. I will simply, file the returns. Let's understand this with an example. So see, today, let's assume 4 Feb 2025. I made an export invoice. I will, whenever I'm filing my return, show it to the government, show it to the common portal by showing it in GSTR 3B, etc. I will also today only, the day on which I generate my export invoice. Now see, understand, you don't have to actually always give a letter of undertaking. It's a continuity kind of letter of undertaking, which means that for some period, for some amount, let's say for one particular year, a particular amount, let's say we decided on $1 lakh. So a continuing bond continues for $1 lakh. As in when I keep generating my export invoices, whatever amount the invoice is of, GST on the same is reduced from this letter of undertaking, which means, let us say I am generating an invoice of $50,000, GST on the same 18%. So $50,000 into 18% will be reduced from this $1 lakh as a notional reduction, that this much bond is now utilized. Remaining will still be available to me for further exports, right? So simply what happens here is, you don't actually have to physically submit a bond or LUT every time. Yearly bond or LUT is there and you can just keep utilizing the limits from the same. So what happens is, the day on which I am generating an export invoice, my bond or LUT I have to submit. Right, yes. In this, I am binding myself that within 3 months from here, the day on which I am generating my export invoice, within 3 months from here, I will actually make an export. The day on which I generate export invoice, within 3 months from here, I will actually make an export. All the conditions will be satisfied. This is what I am promising to government. If not done, I am saying, if not done within 3 months, then after 3 months, within 15 days. So let us say 3 months will get over on March, April, May. 4 May 25, 3 months are over. So within 15 days from here, now I am saying within 15 days from here, I will pay the tax also on this invoice, because this invoice is generated. I have showed it in GSTR 1, 3B, etc. But I have not paid any taxes on the same, no, because I am saying it is an export invoice. It's already 3 months. It's already 3 months from the date on which I have generated my export invoice, but I have not actually exported the goods, or I have not actually exported the goods. What to do? When the 3 months expire from the export invoice, within 15 days from here, I will pay the tax also and I will pay the interest also, along with 18% per annum. If I am not doing the same, government has my bond, LUT, they can revoke it, they can also recover the money from my assets also. So here we are saying that for goods, I am promising to government that I will pay the tax along with 18% within 15 days after 3 months, or whatever further period the commissioner allows, from the date of issue of invoice for export if the goods are not actually exported out of India. We are not talking about refunds as such here, because this invoice is without payment of GST. I told to government that I am going to export and therefore I am not paying GST only. The government is saying that at least export. It's been 3 months, you have already issued the invoice and still you are not exporting. It could be probably a domestic supply also, which you are naming under export just to save your GST, and therefore government is saying we are giving you 3 months time in additional, in certain circumstances. Let's say commissioner may also extend this 3 month time. What extension? There's no time limit. Commissioner can extend as much as he wants based on the facts or circumstances. Normal time limit is 3 months. The day on which I generate the invoice, within 3 months from here, I have to actually export the goods. If I'm not exporting, then within 15 days from the expiry of this 3 months, now I will have to give the tax also to government, and I will also have to give interest at the rate of 18% to government now. Right, ma'am. Then we are saying that for services we are saying, see, understand, services to export happens when you are actually realizing the sale proceeds. Goods export happens as soon as the goods cross the territorial waters of India. I will say export has happened. But in case of services, I have to realize money also. So here we are saying that the day on which invoice for export of service is generated, the day on which invoice for export of service is generated, within 1 year from there, I have to actually realize the sale proceeds. If within 1 year from there, I am not realizing the sale proceeds, I have to give this amount of GST to government within 15 days after expiry of 1 year, plus FEMA can extend this time limit, or commissioner can also extend this time limit more further. If payment of such service is not received by exporter in convertible forex or Indian rupees, whenever, yes Ayushi, whenever RBI permits. So see, understand what we are saying here is the day on which I am generating my invoice. Within 3 months from here, my goods should go out of India. Then I will say, okay, export of goods has happened, and then later on refund application can be made, etc. If within 3 months my goods are not going out of India and I am not actually exporting only, then I will have to pay all the GST applicable on that invoice. Now I cannot say it is without payment of tax, etc. Now I will have to pay all the GST, and that too along with 18% per annum interest. In case of services, the day on which I generate the invoice, within 1 year, I have to receive the, because services never physically go out, no. So services, within 1 year of invoice, I have to receive the convertible forex, or for that Nostro account, etc. Some places RBI permits INR. So within 1 year, whatever I have to receive, either forex or permitted INR, simply I will say, wait Ayushi, simply within 1 year, I have to receive the convertible forex. If I am not receiving, then again within 15 days here and within 15 days here, I will have to give the GST back to government. Here, commissioner can extend my 3-month time limit. Here, FEMA, because realization part is now involved, FEMA, including any extended time limit by RBI, whichever is later. So basically, FEMA time limit extension, then RBI time limit extension, whatever is later, I can extend in 1 year, and plus commissioner can also further extend this time limit within which I have to receive the forex of the services being exported. Right. Very simple now. Details of export invoices furnished in GSTR 1 shall be transmitted by common portal to IceGate in case of goods now. When goods are not exported within time and registered person fails to pay the amount, your LUT and bond facility will be withdrawn immediately. Your recovery will begin immediately. Facility shall be restored only when you are actually paying all the amounts due. If you are a person who is already prosecuted that you have evaded taxes greater than 2.5 crore earlier and you are already prosecuted for the same, LUT facility is not allowed to you. Now you to compulsorily will have to make the payment of GST, and then only exports will be allowed, and later on you can claim the refund. This without payment of GST facility is not allowed to people already prosecuted for any offence of tax evasion greater than 250 lakh. And this provision also applies, see, all the export provisions also apply as it is whenever you are supplying to SEZ unit or developer, because that is also a zero rated supply. Right. Now Rabia is asking that, ma'am, why to transmit the details here? Now listen and understand very carefully. Whenever I am exporting goods, customs will always play a role if my export is with payment of tax. If my export is with payment of tax, it simply means that the time when I made my export, I have already utilized my credit ledger, cash ledger, I have made the payment. So the refund process is much simpler comparatively. There is no formula as such involved, nothing very complicated. Whatever total I paid, that total amount I'll get as refund in my bank account. Simply shipping, I don't even need to file a refund application. My shipping bill will be matched with my GSTR 1, 1A, 3B, everything done, payments made, and refund will be given to me. A very simple case here. But whenever without payment of tax export I am doing, without payment of tax export if I am doing, first of all, I will have to export. Now see, understand. With payment, which means simply I filed my 3B, I have made the payment. Here when I generate invoice, I will not make any payment in my 3B, no, because I will say this is an export invoice. So I have not made any payment. But now actually export has to happen first of all. So they are saying that from the date of invoice for goods within 3 months, you actually have to make the export. Then we will think about refund, etc. At least you first make the export, right, ma'am? And in case of services, within 1 year from the date of invoice, I have to receive the forex realization. If goods are not exported or forex is not realized for services within 3 months, 1 year plus extension respectively, within 15 days from here, I will have to pay this amount of GST on the invoice applicable which I have not paid yet, right, along with interest, etc. This is one matter. But let us say my export of goods and my export of service has actually happened. I have received the realization. I have actually exported the goods within 3 months, 1 year, whatever time limit was permitted to me. Now, of course, services to customs has no role to play only. But goods, if I have actually exported, it would be exported via customs department only. So we at least need to match know that whatever I am showing on GST portal in GSTR 11A is the same as whatever I have shown in shipping bill to the customs department. So even if, Rabia, it is a refund without payment of tax, ultimately goods are exported and the details has to match. So the details on GSTR 1 and the details on shipping bill has to ultimately match also, no. So here also in case of goods, I will say that when the export is without payment of GST, services customs has no role to play, but for goods, so at least it is not. See, shipping bill will not be my deemed refund application. I will make an application separately only. But as a part of process, at least shipping bill and the details of GSTR 1 should match, no. So simply the details of export invoices are transmitted to by common portal to IceGate only for the matching purpose that yes, this person is saying export has happened for this amount. Customs department can confirm that yes, export has actually happened for this amount. Services, so we received forex only, no. Now what extra confirmation you want? Goods, they will give you refund even without realizing forex. Later on, they will check the realization, etc. within the FEMA time limit. Services, they check the realization first and then give you refund. Goods, they only check whether goods are actually exported or not and they can give you refund. Later on, if you have not realized the money, then they will ask the refund back from you. This is just like a proof as an export has actually happened. GST department will confirm it with the customs department. Tell me, yes, everyone absolutely clear with this? Perfect. Now, a happy news for you. This table of situation, relevant date and documentary evidence is now not applicable for your examination. I mean, the relevant date part is still applicable. Documentary evidence part, it is there in the module, it was there in the module till previous examinations, but now May 2025 onwards, the new modules that ICAI has issued, in a footnote they have mentioned that we will not ask documentary evidence in examination, it is just for your knowledge purpose. So earlier we used to learn also that if I am claiming refund, let us say I exported some goods, could be via sea or air, land or post. Then what what documents I have to furnish in order to prove that refund is due. And there used to be a list of all documents, which is also still there in your module. But from the new modules, May 2025 onwards modules that ICAI has issued, they have in a footnote written that we will not be asking what documentary evidence is required in the particular situation. So now this becomes irrelevant for you. If you want for your knowledge purpose, you can still read it that ma'am, if we are claiming for refund in this particular situation, with which evidences or documents we should go to government. But now it is no more applicable for your examination. Right, ma'am. Chal. Still, we will just go through the table once. Okay. So if I'm exporting goods via, let's say, sea, air, land or post, simply the day on which my goods are moving out of India. So my ship or aircraft leaves India, my goods pass the frontier of customs, land customs, or let us say the post office dispatches the goods when I'm exporting it via post. That only becomes the relevant date from which I have to run within 2 years and make application for refund. Then this situation, if additional IGST is paid for upward revision in price subsequent to export. See, I've already explained you this part when we were studying export under GST. That let us say I have exported, I've got the refund also, and then later on, let us say if the prices are revised upwards, I issue a debit note, etc. And similarly, when so the time limit is still going to be the same only. So let's say today goods worth $100 are exported, and later on the price is revised to $120. To claim the refund of this $20 also, the original time limit from export is only going to count, because actually export was done on this date only. So within 2 years you revise your prices upward and you claim the additional refund, it is all okay. Yes, Joshua. So additional IGST paid for upward revision in price subsequent to export, refund for initial tax paid already at the time of export. Later on, if I want to get refund, then also within this same original time limit only, I have to go and run to ask for refund. Then again, there is CSD, Canteen Stores Department under the Ministry of Defense, which is also eligible to claim refunds. So it's like we don't have to study the entire provisions of what the Ministry of Defense says. Whatever is relevant for GST purpose, only that we have to see. So for GST purpose, we simply say that there are these canteen stores departments under Ministry of Defense. Now what happens is, basically it is all used for the army, navy, defense, military purposes. So whatever they purchase for the specified purposes, government gives them straight away 50% refund. 50% refund is given to them for whatever taxes they have paid. Now for us, refund application 01, UIN people 10, and canteen stores department people, it is 10A, which they have to file once in every quarter. So they have to apply for refund in form RFD 10A once in every quarter. So all the inward supplies of goods were received from a registered person. Again, of course, if they purchase from a registered person, then only they have paid GST, then only they can ask for refund. If I purchase from unregistered person, when I have not paid anything, how can I ask for refund? So inward supplies should be received from a registered person against a tax invoice. Details of such supplies have been furnished by the registered person in outward supplies of GSTR 1. Also taxes paid in GSTR 3B by my supplier. Name and GST number of applicant is mentioned in the tax invoice, and the goods have been received by canteen stores department for the purpose of subsequent supply to unit run canteens authorized customers of the canteen stores department. Basically, to summarize it, we simply say that under the Ministry of Defense, whatever they purchase for authorized and specified purposes in canteen stores department, they get 50% refund of the taxes that they have paid, just like UIN people. UIN people get full refund, these people get 50% refund. Again, same, they have to purchase from a registered person. Your details should be there on the invoice. Your supplier should have paid the taxes to government in 3B, should have declared the sales in GSTR 1. Then you can go and file a refund application. Here it is 10A to be filed once in every quarter, and here it is 10. You can file anytime within 2 years from the end of the quarter. Done. Now, two particular areas where we are claiming refund from electronic credit ledger to bank account, where refund formula has to be applied. One is zero rated supplies and other is inverted rated duty tax structure. You have to not just understand the formula, but you will also have to learn the formula. And sometimes in concepts like this, even if you are not understanding, of course it is important, I'll make you understand, but just saying, let's, in case you forget the understanding later on and you forget what was the concept which ma'am had explained, always learning is important, remembering is important. Even if you remember the formula, you will never get an incorrect answer. I have written things this way that even if you learn these 2 pages, no, then also every single answer will be correct. See, as I mentioned in the beginning of the class, I was a person most afraid of this particular chapter. So I did every possible thing. So now I'll make you understand also. And plus I was like, if there is some student like me that even after explaining 100 times he is not able to grasp, at least he can learn this and each and every answer will be correct. that stage will not come where you'll have to learn it. I'll explain you how to make the formula, but still learning is important. Keep this thing in mind. Chalo, we first talk about zero rated supplies. The formula for zero rated supply, how do we calculate the refund figure? In layman language, we'll understand everything. Let us say we take example of Ashish. We take example of Ashish here. Ashish has purchased some raw materials. Raw material 1, raw material 2, some other input services, some capital goods, etc. And Ashish has a total ITC today of, let us say, 70 crore rupees. Very rich Ashish is. 70 crore ITC from raw materials and services and capital goods that he has purchased. Using it, he manufactured all these items here. Now, out of all the items that he manufactured, let us say he was able to make a sale of, 300 crore internationally. So, exports are worth 300 crore and there is a 250 crore domestic sales also. So, Ashish is selling in India also and Ashish is selling outside India, basically doing export also. Right, ma'am. And it is all export without payment of tax. It is all export without payment of tax. My simple question to you is, should government straight away give a refund of 70 crore to Ashish or no, ma'am? Full refund will not be allowed because full outward supply is not export. He is utilizing these credits to make some domestic supplies also. For which though he is not eligible for refund. Refund should only be given for the supplies which are pertaining to export. Does this make sense? Say yes, ma'am. Ma'am, the total sale is of 550 crore. So I will say that the 70 crore ITC pertains to a total sale of 250 crore. So the export sale is only 300 crore. What should be the proportionate ITC, ma'am? This figure Ashish should ideally get as refund. Say yes or no. Did you understand this? I am saying the total credit of 70 crore is utilized to make a sale of 550 crore. But ma'am, out of it, international, basically export sale is only 300 crore. So proportionate refund only Ashish should get. Does everyone agrees with me here? Say yes, ma'am. Done. You are ready with the refund formula. The formula for zero rated supply says that whatever is your net ITC, 70 crore here. But remember, in this net ITC, we only take credits of input and input service. We do not take credit of capital goods. For capital goods, they don't give you refund as such. Machines will be there with you. You can use them later on, etc. Only for input and input services, they give you refund. Okay. So, ma'am, 70 crore is the net ITC and we assume it is only for input and input service. If there is any capital goods ITC, you will reduce it. Multiply by what I will do? Zero rated supply of goods and multiply by plus zero rated supply of services. Upon what I'm doing here is total adjusted turnover. Can you make the formula on your own? Everyone say yes, ma'am. What we did, cross multiplication here, 70 multiplied by 300 upon 550. So simply 70 is the net ITC here. Multiply by, I gave you total of goods and services, which is 300 crore, my zero rated supplies, and upon 550 is my total supply. Say yes, everyone, yes or no. No option of no, of course, there has to be a yes only. So this is how the formula for maximum admissible refund under zero rated supply is made. Simply net ITC, which comprises only of ITC availed on inputs and input services, no capital goods, only input and input services. Ma'am, why green? Earlier, there were some exceptions here of Rule 89, Sub-Rule 4A, 4B, but those rules are only now scrapped. 89, there were rules 89, 4A, 4B, which are removed only, scrapped only. So it something which is not there in your syllabus, which is removed only. Makes no sense to even explain you. So things have now become simple for you. You just have to take all the input service ITC for the period for which you are claiming refund, multiply it by what? Zero rated supply of goods, zero rated supply of services upon total adjusted turnover. So there are total 4 terms in the formula. There are a total of 4 terms in the formula. Term number 1, net ITC, where I understood that for whatever period I am claiming refund, I simply have to take my total input ka ITC and my total input service ka ITC. I will exclude my capital goods ITC for the period here. Simple. Term number 2, ma'am, let us understand what is turnover of zero rated supply of goods. Again, there were some exceptions of subrule 4A, 4B, which is now everything is removed, so makes no sense for you. What you simply understand is whatever export I have actually done. Let us say I am saying that I made export of 300 crore without payment of tax. If this same product I supply domestically in India, let's assume I sell it for 250 crore. Because normally export prices are higher than domestic prices, I am assuming that export I made for 300 crore, but if I would have supplied the same thing in India, I would have supplied only for 250 crore. What I will simply do here is compare 250, multiply by 1.5 into with 300 crore, and whichever is lower will be accepted as my export of zero rated supply of goods turnover. What the assumption they are taking here is whatever price I am charging domestically of the like goods, maximum 1.5 times I am charging in export. But ma'am, let's assume domestically I supply for 100, but export I'm actually doing for 400. I'm even realizing 400, but still for formula purpose, maximum what I will take is 400, which is the actual value furnished under bond LUT. Compare it with 100 into 1.5, which is 150, whichever is lower is 150, will be accepted as my zero rated supply of goods. So always my zero rated supply of goods ka turnover will be restricted to the actual export price or 1.5 times of the domestic price, whichever is lower, I will have to accept. Now it's a rule made by government. You cannot do anything in this. Even if you are actually realizing 400, still you cannot do anything. The refund you will get only for the amount pertaining up to 150 crore only. Say yes, understood. How to calculate net ITC, input plus input service. How to calculate zero rated supply of goods, the actual export price, or we will say domestic price into 1.5 times, whichever is lower is the turnover of zero rated supply of goods. Then we talk about zero rated supply of services. Now understand, ma'am, always for service, money payment forex is important. Whether goods are services are actually given, not given, doesn't matter. We simply have to see if money realized. No, export of service happened. So simply for whatever period you are making refund application, let's say I'm making application for Jan, Feb, March quarter. In this Jan, Feb, March quarter, what money I have received for my export of service. Now, it is possible that invoice could be of some earlier period, but money if I have received in this quarter, no. So let's assume in this quarter, I received 50 crore for export of service. A total of 50 crore I received in my bank account for the simple reason that I am doing export of service to someone. What minus I will do is, from this 50 crore, is there any advance that I have received? From this 50 crore, let's assume 4 crore. We are standing in Jan, Feb, March quarter. So in February month only, I received 4 crore as advances, which is included in 50, of course, because 50 is the total that I received for export of service. Now out of this 50, let's assume 4 is advance, for which I am yet to export service. I actually did this service of 4 crore, let's assume in April or May or June. Then I will take this 4 crore in that period, not today. So plus I will do any amount that I received in previous period, but the service I have completed in this period. Just like this 4 crore I am reducing today from here, and I will add 4 crore in the period where I actually finish up my service. Similarly, if there is any amount that I received in some previous periods, but this time I have completed the service, that amount I am going to add here. So simply, what total money you receive, the total aggregate payment that you receive in the period, plus any payment received in prior period but service completed in this period, which means at that point of time I would have reduced it. Here I am adding it back. And minus if there is any advance received in relevant period but service is not yet completed, I'll reduce that amount, and ultimately this is the payment for which service is also completed. I am left with the payment for which service is also completed. If service is pending, then also you reduce, and if payment is pending, then so it will not come here in only. Even if I have completed the service but I have not received any payment, then also it cannot come here, because we start only with the amount that payment we have received. From this payment, I reduce the service which is pending and I add the service which is completed but payment was received in some prior period. So this amount is actually the payment for which service is also completed. Say yes, everyone understood. So for zero rate supply of services, I will simply take the total payment minus advance plus any prior period payment for which service completed now. 3 out of 4 terms are done. 4 terms total, net ITC multiply by zero rated supply of goods plus zero rated supply of service and upon total adjusted turnover. We are only left with the understanding of total adjusted turnover. Otherwise than that, everything is done. Now this is of course very simple. The total zero rated supply that I take in my numerator, that same I will take, plus all the non-zero rated supplies I will take, and minus if there is any exempt supply I will reduce. I want one student out of you to answer me why I will not take exempt supply in my total adjusted turnover. Let us say my total turnover is 550 CR, out of which 300 is export. Then let us say 100 is exempt supply and 150 is normal domestic taxable supply. They are saying your total adjusted turnover here will simply be 300 which is zero rated, 250 which is non-zero rated, but you remove 100 exempt. So you can do it this ways also, or you can straight away do 300 plus 150. Ultimately only 450 will be considered as your adjusted total turnover. Why not 100 taken here? I want one student out of you to answer this. It is practical, logical. Understanding is there on the screen in front of you. Think and tell me why we have not taken exempt turnover in total turnover. And total should ideally include everything. Exempt, taxable, GRS, everything should ideally be included in adjusted total turnover. But why only export and why only domestic taxable taken and domestic exempt not taken? Very good, Rabia. Ma'am, we are trying to apportion the ITC on exempt supplies that we make outwards. We are not eligible to take ITC also. So my net ITC figure would not be involving any ITC that pertains to my outward taxable turnover, outward exempted turnover, sorry. This net ITC will not be having a single rupee which pertains to exempted outward supply, because that I cannot take as ITC only. So of course, while apportioning, why is there even a need to take exempt supplies here? Very good, very good. Proud of you, Rabia. Proud of you, Ayushi. Perfect understanding here. Ma'am, basically now this 70 crore of credit is not for 550, ma'am, because for 100 that was exempt, I have not taken ITC only. So now I will say that 70 crore ITC is only for 450 crore, out of which 300 crore is exempt. So now how much refund I should get is the final formula here. Understood, everyone? Say yes, ma'am. Is there a need to mug up the same? No, ma'am. You can understand it very simply and very easily. Net ITC, exclude capital goods. You just have to take input as well as input service. Multiply by zero rated supply of goods. Either the actual export price or you will take domestic price, multiply by 1.5 times, whichever is lower. Plus zero rated supply of service. Whatever total payment you receive, minus any advance for which service not completed, plus any prior period advance at that point of time for which service completed now. Upon total adjusted turnover, which means zero rated also plus non-zero rated also. Now non-zero rated also includes exempt, but you don't have to take exempt because ITC for exempt is not available here. Clear with each and every term of the formula? Say yes, ma'am. Then moving on to the next formula, which is refund claim in case of inverted duty tax structure. The maximum refund amount is, first of all, net ITC, and here net ITC is only inputs, no input services, no capital goods. This net ITC is for my total adjusted turnover. But I have to calculate the ITC which is apportioning to inverted rated turnover of goods or services. Minus, actually I have to pay some tax on my inverted rated supply. But why to assume that this full tax will be from net ITC only? I also have ITC on input and input service. So I'll take a total of net ITC which is of input and plus input service, and accordingly I'll assume that some portion is only paid from input and some is paid from input service. Therefore, this is going to be my final refund formula. Services provided by, again, National Skill Development Corporation, National Council for Vocational Education Training, awarding body, assessment agency, training body recognized by National Council for Vocational Education Training in relation to skill vocation qualification. Basically, they're all government run institutions doing government run courses, and exemption is granted to all of them. There's nothing to explain as such. You just have to read and know the names of all these agencies who have been granted with the exemption. Services of affiliation provided by Central State Educational Board. Now see, understand what board you guys have studied. Like, do you understand the meaning of board? Like, I have studied in state board school, like Gujarat State Board School. There could be students studying from CBSE or ICSE, etc. So, ma'am, how do we decide? So, your school gets affiliated with the government according to the board. So, these services of affiliation provided by Central or State Educational Board or Council or similar body to school established, owned, controlled by any government. Here we say that these affiliation services are also exempt under GST, right? So, like I have studied from a Gujarat board school. You might have studied from CBSE, right? So, these kind of affiliation services, we are saying services of affiliation provided by Central or State Educational Board or Council or similar body to any school established, owned or controlled by CG, SG, UT, LA, government authority or government entity, then exemption is granted. Okay, ma'am. And then flying training courses conducted by flying training organization. Again, this flying training organization is also run by government only. So, the Directorate General of Civil Aviation, DGCA, the Directorate General of Civil Aviation, if provides a completion certificate to you for completing this kind of a training program, then whatever amount you are paying for this training program is also going to be exempt under GST. So, flying training courses conducted by flying training organization has to be approved by Directorate General of Civil Aviation, where a completion certificate is also required by DGCA. Then these kind of flying programs are also exempt under GST. Basically, there is nothing that I can teach you here. Yeah, it's just a read once category thing. Because it is amendment, it might be asked in examination. But I don't think it is very tough for you to understand or remember. Flying courses certified by DGCA, exempt. Affiliation provided by government, like Central State Educational Board or Council or similar bodies to any school established or owned or controlled by government, it is all exempt under GST. And all of these National Council for Vocational Courses, training or assessment bodies or awarding bodies or for any skill vocation qualification basically recognized by government, it is all exempt under GST. Exemptions under government services, right, ma'am? In RCM chapter, I had told you, government providing services to business entity is taxable under reverse charge mechanism. But there was exception of MyPati. I had told you at that point of time that we will catch up with MyPati later on in exemption chapter. We will catch up with MyPati later on in exemption chapter. Today is the day where we catch up with MyPati now. My means, chalo, my means you tell me. My means Ministry of Railways, Indian Railways. So here simply we are saying any service provided by Ministry of Railways to anyone, being business entity, not business entity, anyone, any service provided by Ministry of Railways particularly is taxable under forward charge mechanism only under GST. Government has now come up with some new notifications to give some exemptions. Otherwise, all services provided by Ministry of Railways were compulsorily taxable under forward charge mechanism only. First exemption, very simple. Ministry of Railways, if to individual services are provided by way of sale of platform tickets or waiting rooms or cloakroom services or battery operated car services, let's say it's a very big railway station, so to move from point A to point B in the railway station, Ministry of Railways is providing you battery operated car services, or you are purchasing a platform ticket because you want to see someone on the railway station, or let's say you are paying some charges to rest in the waiting room, etc. So all of these things government has given exemption particularly. Otherwise than that, any service provided by Ministry of Railways is taxable completely under forward charge mechanism, no RCM. Whether these services are provided by Ministry of Railways to business entity, to non-business entity, anyone, it's all taxable under forward charge mechanism only. One zone division, but now here they are saying that if one zone or division under Ministry of Railways is providing any service to any other zone or division under Railway Ministry only, then we are giving exemption. See, earlier today straight away came up saying that Ministry of Railways, everything will fall under FCM only. But then they realized that no, something should be exempt. What if one zone of railway ministry is giving services to another zone of railway ministry? What to do? There you give exemption, no problem. Or particularly, these services provided by Ministry of Railways are now exempt under GST because they are amendment, very high chances of this being asked in examination, particularly because everything supplied by Ministry of Railways is FCM only. Only these things are exempt under GST, that too they are amendments this time. So you understand they are important, of course. This particularly is not that important, understand. Services by special purpose vehicles to Railway Ministry for use of infrastructure built and owned by them during the concession period against consideration, and services of maintenance supplied by railways to SPV in relation to the said infrastructure. What kind of arrangements are these? Normally, what are special purpose vehicles? First of all, special purpose vehicles are institutes or organizations, entities formed temporarily for a particular special purpose only. So let us say we are building a track, railways is building a track, and just to build that track or to look after the maintenance and construction of that track, a special entity is formed, a special purpose vehicle is formed. Now that SPV is providing services to Railway Ministry. How? They are building infrastructure. They are building infrastructure, owning infrastructure, and they are providing services to Railway Ministry to use these infrastructures built by them, owned by them in the concession period. What is concession period? The period that is agreed by under the contract for which it is going to be used is a concession period. Okay, ma'am. The Railway Ministry, of course, will be providing some consideration to them to use such infrastructure, or Railway Ministry might also be providing in other than cash consideration, like Railway Ministry can maintain this infrastructure, etc., built by SPV because we are using, etc. So what happens is the infrastructure is built and owned by special purpose vehicle, which can be anyone, even a private person, doesn't matter. So the special purpose vehicle is built and owned by the infrastructure is built and owned by a special purpose vehicle. Ministry of Railways uses this infrastructure. In against, they can pay consideration in form of money also. They can also pay consideration in form of servicing that infrastructure that they are using, etc. This kind of arrangement where the special purpose vehicle is giving services to use the infrastructure to railways, in against of which railway is paying consideration or non-monetary consideration like maintenance services, etc. This is exempt under GST. Tell me, do you understand? Say yes or no. This is important because it's an amendment. Do you know what is RERA? What is RERA? Any idea what is RERA? It's a regulatory body in relation to real estate. So whatever statutory collections RERA is doing, those stat collections are now also exempt under GST. Government issued a notification for the same. Now the question was, the term reinsurance also includes retrocession services. What is the meaning of this? See, retrocession simply means when a reinsurer also avails reinsurance, it is known as retrocession. Meaning, let us say, I was very much concerned about this specs. See, I cannot see only without this specs. So I got insurance done of this specs. Chal. Better example. My throat is not well since a very long time now. So I thought if I will not have my voice, what I will do in life, because my profession is completely related to my voice. So I got insurance of my throat done. It's possible, yes. I got insurance of my throat done with an insurance company. Right. That insurance company was also scared what to do, because the insurance company was thinking the claim amount is very big. So they also got a reinsurance done with some another insurance company. Now the reinsurer is also scared, and the reinsurer got reinsurance done from some another insurance company. That particular reinsurance of a reinsurance is known as retrocession services. So insurance is exempt, reinsurance is exempt, and reinsurance of reinsurance, which is known as retrocession, is also exempt under GST only for these particular yojanas that are specified here. Tell me, are you understanding? Yes, ma'am. Earlier, what was the situation? What is the amendment here? First understand, and there is a very high probability of this being asked in examination this time. So listen, earlier only transmission and distribution of electricity was exempt, right? Like in Gujarat, Torrent is the authority, or Torrent is the in what we say entity taking care of the electricity distribution. So whatever electricity bill we get is from Torrent. What is the scene in your state? Tell me. Here though I also don't know post marriage, but yeah, Ahmedabad, at my mother's place, the bill used to come from Torrent. Okay. So Torrent is what? Torrent is basically the electricity distribution and transmission utility here in Ahmedabad. Similarly, you would be getting your electricity bill from where? Of course, the name of authority is written on the bill. No. So earlier, only the charges that they used to collect for electricity, only the charges that they used to collect for electricity particularly. So let us say I am using X units of electricity in a particular period, multiply by whatever is the rate of electricity, that the only the electricity bill for transmission and distribution used to be exempt under GST. But all the other charges, let us say I want to shift my meter, or I want to increase the capacity, or I want to take some extra line, I want to get my duplicate bill issued. For all of these things, they were all taxable. Only pure electricity was exempt under GST, but all the other things were taxable. Now after amendment, what government has done is everything in relation to electricity they have exempted. Means not just earlier it was only one line exemption, transmission and distribution of electricity. But now they are saying transmission distribution of electricity, then providing meter equipment on rent, testing meters, capacitors, transformers, shifting meters, service lines, issuing duplicate bills, releasing connection, or anything basically that is incidental. Anything basically that is incidental to electricity only, given by electricity transmission or distribution utilities, are now exempt under GST. There are high chances, I am hoping that this will come in your or either May 25 or November 25 examination. This might show up, because since a very long time only transmission and distribution of electricity was exempt, but now along with transmission distribution, all the other incidental services related to electricity provided by the electricity distribution and utility are exempt under GST. Yes, now 19 as such is also not very important, but yeah, because it's amendment, you can consider it as important for your attempt. After one or two attempts, this will also become not important. What they are saying here, listen to me very carefully. You have to understand this in one go only. Import of service by establishment of foreign company in India, which is an airline company, from registered person or own establishment outside India without consideration, provided that GST paid by airline company in India on transport of goods and passengers. Okay, we will take a good example and understand everything. Once again, import of service by establishment of foreign company in India, which is an airline company from registered person or related person or own establishment outside India without consideration. Let us assume, Etihad. It's a foreign airline. Yes, ma'am. Emirates or Etihad, any example you can think of. British Airways, let us say, which is an airline company outside India. Okay, ma'am. They would have their Indian counterpart also. Yes, ma'am. In India. Are they both related person or own establishment of each other? Yes, ma'am. So we are saying that if the establishment of foreign airline company in India, so let us say Etihad or the Emirates in India is taking some services, is importing some services from Emirates in Dubai, we want to exempt it. But there are some conditions associated with it. Listen to me very carefully. If without consideration, see, normally we know that import of service for business purpose from related person own establishment even without consideration according to section 7(1)(c) schedule 1 para 4 is a supply under GST. So if Emirates India is taking some services from Emirates Dubai in course furtherance of business because they are related person, even if there is no consideration, will it fall in the purview of supply? Yes, ma'am. And government will be asking GST on the same. But they are saying particularly only for airline company, we want to give exemption, and that too only to foreign airline companies. Okay. But what are the conditions here? Condition number 1, whatever goods or passengers they are transporting here in India, GST should be paid on the same. So if Emirates is issuing tickets to passengers in India for travel, of course they should be collecting GST on those airline tickets. If they have goods cargoes and they are transporting goods for Indian people and they are collecting GST, that is required. So we are saying that on transportation of goods or passengers in India, you should be collecting GST normally. Okay, ma'am. Also, we are saying that airline company in India has been designated by foreign government under bilateral air services agreement with India, and on a reciprocal basis, the designated Indian airlines are not subject to similar taxes for same services by government of country designating the foreign airline company. Meaning, if we have an Indian airline company similarly giving services to their counterpart in their country, they should also be giving us the same exemption that we are giving to Emirates. What we are saying, the airline company in India has been designated by foreign government under bilateral air services agreement. So first of all, we recognize their airline, they recognize our airline, and under a bilateral contract we are agreeing this. So on a reciprocal basis, the designated Indian airlines are also not subject to similar taxes. So let's assume we designate their Emirates, they designate our Indigo. So we are also not collecting taxes on such imports from their related person. They should also again be not collecting the similar taxes. So let us say when Emirates Dubai takes services from Emirates India, it should be exempt there, and when Emirates India is taking services from Emirates Dubai, that should also be exempt here. So we have to be under a bilateral contract. It should not happen that we are giving exemptions and then they are collecting GST or the applicable taxes there. That should not happen. So simply on the normal transportation of goods or passengers, they are collecting and paying GST. Perfect, ma'am. Second, they are importing services as an airline company from their related person or own establishment only, that's outside India. And also the government there is recognizing this arrangement and they are also providing similar exemptions there, just like we are providing similar exemptions in India. Are you understanding this? Say yes, ma'am. The Indian airline company should be recognized by them. We recognize their airline company. It's a bilateral agreement. We will also not ask for GST when we are importing something from there, but they should also not be asking for GST again when their counterpart is importing something from here. Understanding, everyone? It has to work two ways. Clear, ma'am. Then point number 20, again because it's an amendment, it becomes important. R&D services supplied by a government entity or a research association or university or college or institution notified against consideration received in the form of grants. So if any of these people are doing research and development services for which they are getting government grants, their R&D services will become exempt under GST. Nothing tough. R&D services provided by these people receiving government grant is exempt, is the basic underline. Right, ma'am. Okay, ma'am. Then this point also we have already covered in the chapter of RCM, that renting of residential dwelling for use as residence, except if registered person is taking in relation to business, there RCM applies. Otherwise, we normally know that renting of residential for dwelling for residential purposes to URP is also exempt, and to RP also. If it is for personal purposes, it is exempt only. But here government says that with an amendment, it is now inserted that, and I remember when I was teaching RCM, someone had asked me this doubt also, and I told that it will be cleared in exemption chapter. That, ma'am, what about hostels or PG accommodation or student residences? We are also basically using it for residential purposes only. But government has now issued a notification saying that we don't want it to be exempt. Exemption is given right in the next entry, but it is restricted exemption. So we are saying that normally, if a residential dwelling is taken for residential purposes, it is exempt. That one RP business is a separate situation. Other than that, normally taking residential dwelling for residential purposes is exempt only under GST. But this entry will not apply to student residences, hostels, camps or PG accommodation or like. But we are saying that if such PG accommodations are provided to anyone at least continuously for a period of 90 days, means he is genuinely residing there, not using as a hotel, like going for 10-15 days, that's kind of a hotel. And hotel, etc., government wants to keep it taxable only. Government is saying that if you are continuously staying at a place for at least 90 days, we understand you are actually residing there. You're actually taking accommodation services there. Now whatever consideration you are paying in your PG, hostel or camp, etc., where you are at least staying for a period of 90 days or above, and per month your PG or hostel charges are less than equal to 20,000 only, then you will get exemption. Highest chances of this being asked in examination because of amendment, that accommodation service provided to someone where at least you are staying for a minimum period of 90 days, right? Less than 90 days, government is thinking that you are using that PG, etc. for hotel purposes, right? Not even 3 months if you are staying somewhere, it is not your residence basically. It's kind of a hotel service that you are using, hotel or lodging or etc. purposes. So normally, the normal residential exemption is withdrawn on hostel, PGs, etc. And against it, government came up with an exemption saying that if you are paying more than 20,000 per month to a PG or hostel or camp or like thing, understand it is posh, it is lavish, and you can afford to pay GST. Up to 20,000, we understand that students normally migrate for studies or for job purposes, etc. And they stay in PGs, hostels, and the rent is up to 20,000 only per month. Then exemption will be given. Bolo, is it clear? Say yes, ma'am. Highest chances. Remember 20,000, remember 90 days. At least you have to stay. Right, ma'am. What is anti-profiteering? We have already understood and we have discussed this point, that whenever government reduces the rate of GST on any particular goods or service, you as a supplier should pass the benefit to your ultimate customer and not increase your profits by increasing the base price. This is known as profiteering, and government has put provisions against profiteering which are known as anti-profiteering. I had explained you with an example saying that, let us say a coffee is for 100 rupees, GST 28%, and therefore today you are getting this coffee for 128. Now, if government reduces the rate to 5%, ideally you should get the coffee at 105 only. But what the supplier does, supplier thinks that all the customers as such are accustomed to giving 28%, to give 128 rupees. What's the problem? So he did back calculation, 128 divided by 105 percentage. And now he increased the base price of the coffee to 129, 121.9. Plus if I do 5 percentage, I again arrive at 128 only. If you are doing this, it is known as profiteering, and government has strict laws against profiteering known as anti-profiteering measure. Government says that reduction in price is just because the ultimate customer should get the goods at a cheaper rate, and not that you as a supplier increase your profit margins. So section 171 makes it mandatory that any reduction in the rate of tax or benefit of ITC shall be passed on to the recipient by way of reduction in prices. Now there's a sunset provision for CCI, Competition Commission of India. See, earlier all the cases of anti-profiteering used to go to anti-profiteering authority. Now the cases go to, then they change the authority, and all the cases are now going to Competition Commission of India. However, from April 2025, they are also it's also a sunset provision for CCI. Now all the cases of anti-profiteering further will be prosecuted by appellate tribunal. Now the cases will be heard by appellate tribunal. So we are saying that government may, on recommendation of council, specify a date from which this CCI, Competition Commission of India, will not accept any cases. Now all the further cases from April 2025 will be heard by the appellate tribunal. In appeals chapter also I had told you that when I was teaching you appellate tribunal, that all the place of supply related matters and anti-profiteering matters are compulsorily heard by the principal bench of the appellate tribunal only, if you remember. Yes, ma'am. So as of now, though, we have Competition Commission of India, but it's a sunset provision. Now onwards, from April 25, everything will be accepted by appellate tribunal only. Right, ma'am. But for point number 1 and 2, we are saying time limit for re-importation is 5 years plus 2 years. Initially, it was 3 years plus 2 years. Now it is amended to 5 plus 2 years, which means today if I send my goods for repairs, or today if I normally even sell my goods abroad, and if I am bringing those goods back again, it has to come within 5 years plus 2 years of the starting from the date when I had originally sent my goods.